Hi, welcome. That music got you pumped up? You ready? Ready for an exciting panel? It's a good thing you all have sat mostly towards the back because there's a good chance there's going to be a fight up here today. So welcome. My name is Scott Donaton. I run Ensemble, which is a branded content agency within Interpublic. I'm going to kind of dive right into, I'm not going to do bios on the panelists above. I know they're all available online and on your apps and all of that good stuff. So given the time constraints of the panel and the quality of the discussion that will follow, I want to jump right in. So the quick introduction, so you have the lay of who everybody is. From my far left, Trudy Hardy is the head of marketing communications and consumer events for BMW of North America. To her immediate right is Jared Hoffman, managing partner of Generate. To his right, Laura Caraccioli from Electus. To her right, Randall Rothenberg, President and CEO of the Interactive Advertising Bureau. And to my immediate left is Lauren Radcliffe, Director of Media and Brand and Entertainment for Dr. Pepper Snapple Group. Join me in welcoming them, please. So for those of you keeping count, that's two executives from the brand side, and Lauren and Trudy, who have done some amazing things with their brands. Two executives from the content studio side, and Laura and Jared, who have made brand partnerships a huge part of their models. And one interesting fit. What are you doing here?
I'm the wild card.
He's the wild card.
One wild card, very sharp observer, commentator, and participant from many angles in our business in Randy Rothenberg. So I think because we're at the end of day, and some of you may have attended some of the panels throughout the day that included brand case studies and different presentations on the topic. And the title of this, Death of Branded Content, Rise of Brand Storytelling, really means something to me. Hopefully it means something to them as well. But the goal here, really, I think what we'd like to accomplish in this panel is to kind of get at the real issues, the real challenges. Again, there are quite a number of brand success stories represented in what's up here, but rather than just kind of come at this from the what have you done in the space and why is it great, I really want to have an honest discussion with all of our panelists about what are the challenges, what are the issues, how do you really make this thing something that moves beyond being a trend into being a respected marketing discipline. And I think there are a lot of steps that remain for the industry in order for it to get there. There might even be some question from someone like Randy about whether and how we can get there, at least in a scaled way. So I'm going to jump in with a first question of just asking, how do you each, and be fairly tight with this, how do you define the space? What does it mean to you when you think about branded content? We can get deeper on role in the marketing mix and all that, but what does it mean to you, and how important do you think it is right now to your day-to-day business and your model from the different perspectives you approach it? Trudy, I'll start with you.
I think that's a hard one for me to answer very succinctly, but I'll give it a shot, because I think sometimes there's a business reason that you need to engage in brand storytelling, something that you just can't accomplish with a 30-second TV spot. And I think other times it's just about the emotional engagement that you want from branded storytelling. So I think it varies depending on what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think for us, you can define it easily by the seats at the table and who's at the table when you're doing stuff. There are certain things that are entirely driven for us by writers and directors, and it's about those people's vision. There are things that are driven by the brands and the partnerships with those writers and directors, and changing the way that development happens and the way production happens by bringing more people into the table and executing against their individual goals.
And for us, it's the blending of art and science, and marrying those and bringing those two entities to the table together and sitting there and really working together on a storytelling and a brand-led initiative.
I don't know what it is. I'm here to learn.
And for us, I mean, it's all of the above, and just the frequency of which we are putting messages in the marketplace, and the amount of different places on a daily basis. Everything that we do needs to be seen through the lens of content, in terms of making sure that we're reaching our consumers in the most impactful way possible.
And I think that when we talk about this shift again from branded content, to me branded content was a buzzword, it was a fad, it led to a lot of kind of brands rushing in and doing things that were often not strategic, were opportunistic, they didn't know what they wanted going into it, and so they weren't sure what they got coming out of it. And a lot of it, if we go back in, let's say just in the last 10 years, was fear-based initially. It was driven by fear that DVR penetration would mean that people could bypass traditional advertising messaging, and could you insert your messaging into the content people were already consuming. And I think as we've seen with every technology that's come along, that consumer empowerment and control. And I think the brand storytelling really means that we're going to a place where consumers clearly now can and do interact with or not interact with every form of content on their own time frames and on their own, they decide what, whether, when, and how they're going to interact with any form of content. And so I think for brands, it's really how are you making sure that you're adding value to the conversations they're having? How are you, telling your story to them in ways that they're going to want to engage with it, as opposed to an intrusive, interruptive model? Randy, what's so hard to understand about that?
I think it's so open-ended as to be meaningless. Honestly, and among other things, plain, straightforward advertising is branded content. So I think what's actually being talked about, and very fairly, and I think it's very important, is longer form, integrated marketing messages. That is, marketing messages that are integrated into longer form programming. I'm assuming that that's what everybody is actually talking about in order to distinguish it from 30-second spots and also other forms of traditional formatted advertising.
I think it is, although, and again, somebody jump in here, I think every form of storytelling, including 30-second spots, what I would disagree with you is I think that for a lot of brands, the model has been...
You can't disagree with me yet, because I haven't disagreed with you yet.
Interrupt the content people are choosing to spend time with to talk about yourself. Don't care what conversation they're having, don't care whether you're adding value to it, and just kind of wave your hand around in their face for a while and then go away. And I think even with 30-second ads now, there's got to be this sense of, are you telling me something that's worth my time?
Well,
and
keep in mind, I'm the designated contrarian on the panel, so.
By designated, he means he doesn't believe in any of this.
Yeah, but this has been an issue for decades. I mean, when you and I were both journalists in different places, we were talking about the terrible clutter problem on television. It was the biggest thing going. This is before DVRs, too. So the need for great creativity to cut through the clutter goes back as a conversation and even a crisis in the advertising industry, at least to the 1950s. So this is not a new issue at all. I mean, to find ways.
I think you're underestimating the changed relationship, particularly in the digital space, that consumers have with the .coms and the sites that they go to, which is very, very different from having a relationship. Nobody has a relationship with NBC. They don't have a relationship. Some people have a different relationship with an individual show, but when people go to Smosh, which I'll just pick on our own channels, they have a very different relationship with Smosh and what Smosh does than they do at regular television show they see. So when we use that platform to integrate a brand or create opportunities for a brand, it comes from a completely different place than a newspaper comes from, than a television show comes from, than a video game comes from. It's a completely different relationship that is being used as a communication platform for a brand and its messaging.
Okay.
Don't look at me.
I'm not, it's all right.
I think it sounds true.
Let me talk about, one of the things we are talking about here is the changed relationship between content creators and brand marketers. And I think that when I loosely describe it, it's kind of 10 years ago, there was a sense, again, I think of fear on the part of a lot of brands. And on the part of Hollywood, there was a sense of, there's a wallet that I haven't tapped into before that I have the chance to tap into. If you go, and I'm obviously speaking extremely broadly, if you go 5 years ago instead of 10 years ago, I think there was a sense content creators began to be a little more, okay, I know that you kind of are paying for a lot of this, or you deserve a seat at the table, but just sit there quietly. We're the storytellers. We know what we're doing. Try not to interfere with it. And I think now, and maybe this is even a little Pollyanna-ish, but I think that we're actually getting much closer to a point where there is a true partnership being formed in a lot of cases on both sides, and that storytellers are even recognizing that brands, because of the insights they have and the expertise in certain topics, the insights on their own audiences, can actually help them make better content.
Absolutely.
And not just interrupt it. So throw it out there. Trudy, you're nodding. You agree?
Well, if you go back in BMW's history, we've been a big believer in branded storytelling for a long time. 2001 was the launch of BMW Films. To me, one of the most creative endeavors of its time. I wasn't there. I'm not patting myself on the back. I was busy launching the Mini brand, just to put it out there and make it clear. But I'm a big believer in it, and it plays a part in the overall mix. And
What do you think are some of the kind of benefits and challenges of just, how different is it for you when you're working directly with content creators as opposed to beginning with a traditional media owner and what they're selling? It can be a lot more complex, it can be a lot trickier, while it has the ability to be potentially more rewarding as well. How do you approach those kinds of partnerships?
I think it's also it feels a lot more collaborative in terms of the ideation of the content. So I think that all the parties getting into the room to really think through whether it's creative agencies, media agencies, content creators, client, everyone in the room together, trying to figure out what's best for the brand, and that doesn't happen enough, I think, in this space.
Yeah, I mean, the best work that we've ever done has been the closer we get to the content creators and the people really at the seat of the table and writing the story and producing the story and editing that story, the better our end product has been. And when there are too many layers of organizational kind of stakeholders in the way, that's when things get muddled. And I think that vision gets lost. So I do think, Scott, you hit on a good point in terms of just the relationship to sort of the key creator between the brand and telling that story, that authentic story, in the best way possible.
Yeah, because sitting on this side and having the content creators and having the producers there, when they can talk directly to the brands, that's a big win for everybody at that table. And when you have too many stakeholders and you're playing the game of telephone game, and somebody's interpreting a marketing brief, and it's not coming directly from the marketer who can best interpret it, and that creative can then kind of start to digest that, and then the questions that stem from that conversation, that's where the magic starts to happen, and so many people try to stop that conversation. And so that was the frustrating part when I was on another side of the table. It was just that I wanted that conversation to happen. There's magic when you put kind of the storyteller or the engineer in the room with the actual kind of the data and what's trying to be accomplished. Because creatives like to have balance. They like to have those guardrails. It makes them more creative.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many things we couldn't get done, but if you just have the right relationship, I think there's a lot of obstacles. I think fragmentation in the total media landscape has created just layers upon layers of people. And so, you know, the more that brands can really speak to and get together with some of the key creative forces and folks in the industry, I think that's where we're going to win as an industry in moving the conversation and the positive conversation about brand storytelling.
And then it's
forward.
about being disruptive with the kind of business model we want to put forth.
Absolutely.
Because if we have that great conversation and then go back to a very traditional way of executing that vision, we get stuck in this.
So what you're saying, and which, by the way, I would agree with, but I'm trying to force you, is that in effect, advertising agencies are unnecessary because you're both trying to disintermediate the agencies.
I was going to be nice to Scott in the process.
Yeah.
No, I think a big part of it is a change in the types of people in the advertising agencies.
At the agency. So Scott wasn't there before. You know what I mean? When you think of his skill set and what he brings.
You don't have to.
We don't know what we did without him. I mean,
No, did you guys know? No, but it's that type of the agencies had
totally
to
agree with you.
and everybody in this whole industry is rethinking kind of the skill sets that are necessary to sit at the table, and they weren't the same ones from when I started.
But actually, let me push you here because you used to work for a big media agency, and what you're saying in essence is that it's really, and as the clients here are saying, it really is the content that matters most. Everything really must begin with the idea. At the very least, everything must begin with the idea and the distribution of the idea wrapped coherently together. So since we live in an unbundled agency world where procurement of media has increasingly been separated from the content of the media, you really are arguing, I think, that the unbundled agency model doesn't really work in a world of branded content.
Trudy, do you want to?
I would argue that a lot of business has been challenging for a lot of folks, and I think budgets are not exponentially getting bigger at the rate that we need to support agency structures to support this model. And so, Randy, things must change and evolve because we cannot, even with digital and the headcount we have to add just to execute, something will have to give, and folks need to become, the model needs to train, agency structure needs to change, and people need to be trained differently.
So if an alloy comes in and they have access to talent and to writing and to distribution, that whole bundled package seems pretty attractive. You didn't know I was going to do that, did you?
I'm just in here quietly.
I mean, do you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say, that obviously, we're still learning and growing through this. And we had the discussion earlier that we're not set up. And I don't think as clients, we're also set up in the best way. I mean, I work for a German company. There's nothing more process-driven than the organization that I work for. So even the way we're structured, it doesn't open ourselves up for the best storytelling. But that's our job to try to influence that model and change that. And I think that we've come a long way.
I mean, the one thing I would
Agencies play a vital role in figuring out what that deal structure is going to look like. And so, and that's where they kind of control that whole conversation when it happens. And if you're going into a traditional network or into one of the traditional media owners, then you definitely need the
Counterbalance.
Yeah.
It's a different type of agency. I mean, like, well, since this has now turned into that conversation, I think it's a different type.
We'll get out of there in a minute.
But we've,
it's an important conversation.
we've worked with, and I know we've worked a lot of the same people. We've worked with agencies across the board, and there are different. It's the people. It's not the agent. The agency is not the problem, or the agency isn't evil. The people are. It's about who the people are. It's about who the people are. So, in certain cases, and I agree with Laura, if you're spending
People
your
are
time,
evil.
if you're spending your time trading a commodity, which is a 30-second spot on a TV show, it's a commodity. It has a price. It has a value. You trade it. You go back and forth, figure out the value of it. But what I do for a living and what Laura does for a living, for the most part, is not a commodity. It's much more artistic, as you said before. It's the marriage of art and science, and having those intermediaries who can speak both of those languages is really, really important, because I need someone who does what you do to tell me that I don't want to say that in a meeting, that there's a better way to say it, and vice versa. And you need to be able to tell the client, to be able to tell the brand, you don't want to say that. Here's how you say it to get where you want to go, because there are more people like you beginning to arrive at agencies that understand that language. But for the most part, it's a year-old or a 2-year-old animal. It's not a 50-year-old animal like the rest of
Right.
them.
I mean, I think the best benefit for brands, from my perspective, without getting into the whole defense of agencies, I mean, I think, people represent brands. Somebody has to understand that brand is positioning the consumer, make sure that there's all those roles, and it's not about justifying. But what I think is great about this space, without knocking creative agencies or media agencies or branded content agencies, is, even for me, when we set this up, we decided purposefully not to have a production operation in-house, because it was a collaborative model that basically, to me, the best benefit for brands is that the greatest storytellers in the world are all now willing to put their minds to work and their creativity to work against brand challenges. And so I just think it's expanded that definition of creativity. Are there people who feel threatened by that? I'm sure there are. But those are people that probably, that's a whole different set of issues that ultimately, there's some resistance to anything new. But I, from where I sit, the benefit to brands is you have these great minds who are willing to put the same creativity they bring to great storytelling to brand storytelling. Why would you close yourself off to that?
I'd like to give a serious cautionary
Sure.
note. Like, this one is not just playing devil's advocate. This one is actually, I honestly believe, just that if you look at the entire history of the advertising industry, what we're now calling branded entertainment has always had a role. I mean, whether it was controlled circulation publications that go back 90 years through to product integration, so it's always had an important role, but it's always been a subordinate role for two really, really good reasons, which you and I discussed on the phone. Reason number one is there is really nothing more economically efficient in advertising than traditional reach and frequency. It's incredibly difficult and almost by definition diseconomic to think of premising an entire media plan on branded entertainment. So I want to just put that perspective out there, that we're probably not talking about a transition of entire media plans here. We're talking about an important but limited component. Second thing that's really important to understand is that what came to be called in the 1950s, after Pat Weaver innovated it at NBC, what became called the magazine format of advertising. In other words, non-sponsored programming that had multiple advertisers from many, many disciplines. That was really kind of an economic hedge for the advertisers themselves. To be able to go on to multiple programs on multiple networks with their ads that can run everywhere with reach and frequency meant that they were not taking the risk. They were hedging the risk of associating with a single place or a set of single places. So there's a reason that advertising developed the way it did, and it's largely just premised on
I don't
risk
think-
economics.
I just want one thing to that, which I think is interesting. I know that we all deal with it on the story storytelling side, if you look at the name of this panel, how we get to brand storytelling, to me what's interesting is the branded content world, which you talked about a minute ago, is very much based on the advertising model, where every year we're going to throw out what we did last year, and you want us in the creative world to reinvent it, which is completely opposite from television and film and books and storytelling, where it worked. Let's tell the story again. Let's take the story a different place. And I think to get to this idea of brand storytelling, when a character or a world works, you have to feed it. You can't throw it away like it's last year's ad copy and you want new ad copy for the new year, because the audience expects you to stay in that world and stay in that story. It's a campaign thinking, not one-off thinking, which is a big change, I think.
Trudy?
You're right in some ways, because I think, I'll use BMW as an example. We don't have an awareness problem. We don't. Everyone knows us. I don't need to run 30-second television commercials. But I think it's also hard to convince a big organization on how much branded storytelling is the right in your marketing mix and in the equation. So I think that's the bigger challenge that, we still suffer as marketers. And if I, ruled the world, it would be a much different proportion back, at home, because I believe that there are certain things that just require that storytelling. And one of the things for us is we're now in the electric mobility space, and people just don't understand. They can understand gasoline power cards, they can understand hybrids now, and maybe understand diesels, but now we're in fully electric car mode for us, and there's a lot of fears and anxiety out there that I can't address in a 30-second spot. Range anxiety is the biggest one. Am I going to be able to make it to work and home with a 100-mile range? So I have to use some of those channels, but I think also proving that those channels work helps me up and increase the proportion of branded storytelling that I'm able to do. And I think that's where I've now shown the company that does work, and we can shift and change perceptions, and that's when it, the ROI of branded storytelling is, the other part of it. But if you can show that it works, then you can get people behind you.
I think the one thing, Randy, is that you could, just being a very traditional, I oversee all paid media initiatives, but there's no doubt that just traditional media, that, the reach and frequency, although still the power of TV for our brands is so important, but the scale isn't there, isn't where it used to be. And for us, we're not just worried about current consumers, we're worried about our future consumers. A lot of them who are millennials, who are cord cutting and spending times on different platforms, different screens. So I think, in a perfect world, I think we would all put everything back together. I mean, and make things simpler. It is not a simple, paid media world that we lived in, and we have to acknowledge that. And I think as marketers too, Trudy, I think it's about how we're dividing our budgets and with what appropriate levels to support. I mean, many of our most successful branded content initiatives have been connected to retail. Snapple, for example, we've done very successful LTOs based on The Amazing Race and The Celebrity Apprentice, and we've had that model and it's worked. But the reality is you can't keep doing the same thing every year, and you have to sort of change up your tricks. And so, but all these things contribute to brand storytelling, right? They exist in the timeline of who we are as a brand, in terms of consumers' relationship. And I can't tell you how many people still, to this day, we still have our Celebrity Apprentice flavors in market for sale 4 years later.
And I think that's a key, when you can actually, when you can activate at retail, when you can actually, in a way, you use product placement for product development, right?
Mm-hmm. That's
when you
part of
actually
our
end up with a new
strategy.
flavor that stays
And that's
on
what's kind of
shelf.
like with Fashion Star, with really trying to take that whole trend of social shopping and marry that with storytelling. And then you kind of have your instant ROI built into that, because at the end of every episode, you can buy exactly what you just saw, and the story of that dress coming down the runway and why Macy's bought that dress.
So let me ask you a question. Can I answer?
You can ask them a question. One more.
So I know we would all agree, honestly agree, that there is a greater premium on something called creativity than ever before, and because the challenges are greater, obviously, the opportunities are vaster. And so I'm wondering, what is the difference? What makes a incredibly great creative person in this realm? What are the capabilities or qualities of a great creative person here, as opposed to, say, the great advertising copywriter of 20 or 30 years ago, or the great screenwriter of 10 years ago?
I'm not sure that there's any difference between what made you great or not great. I think the number one thing is openness, but I think you also have to know where that openness has to stop. Because at a certain point, you, the brand, or you, the production company, or whoever it is, are trusting that creative to deliver the vision that they sold. So at a certain point in the process, and it's, let's just say it's, if you use a baseball analogy, up to third base, you want everybody's input and everybody's direction, what you're trying to do. But at a certain point, the person who's entrusted with delivering that story and those pieces, with those things around it, has to be allowed to go deliver the story with those pieces. And that's no different than a film or a television series or anything else. If you keep people involved in the creative process, you don't trust the creative, then why'd you hire that creative in the first place? At a certain point, you have to be willing to trust the person you hired, or the person you brought in, whatever it is, to be creative.
But that historically has been very, very hard for marketers to do. At a certain point, I mean, the stories are legion going back to the,
Sure.
George Lois threatening to jump off of cliffs.
But here's the biggest difference, in my opinion, it goes back to what we talked about a minute ago, is now, particularly in the digital space, a lot of the creatives are the network. They are not separate. They are the same people. So again, I'll go back to Smosh, right? These guys are the network. They're millions and millions and millions and millions of viewers every week, every day of the week. So they have a deep understanding of what will work on their platform for what they do. They are not three people removed from the network. They are the network. So there has to be a willingness to understand. And they're fantastic creatives in this space because they understand this is what the brand needs to do. This is what we're trying to get accomplished. Let's do this. But they're also not going to do a very sweet, soft love story that's completely off of their audience.
Yeah, but wait, let me
just to aggregate their audience.
Let me challenge you a little bit, Jared, here, because that's
Not that they're not loving.
That's exactly the kind of thinking that led the television networks into the quiz show scandals back in the 1950s, and that's actually begun to happen in the branded content space. I mean, not that I think this is entirely fair, but The Atlantic just took a big swipe for knowing its audience well enough that it put a Scientology advertorial out there on. Was it on Twitter?
I think as with anything else, I mean, ultimately what it comes down to is not deceiving the audience, right?
Correct.
And making stuff that's worth their time. And more and more, the real thing here we're talking about is that they have the ability to avoid ads. They are allocating attention to the places they want to allocate attention. And in fact, you know what, people are afraid of ad skipping by DVR. Right now, I think I saw a study from Magna that said 10% of ad skipping is DVR. 70% is simply people turning their head down to look at their smartphone
mobile phone
or
is
their
the worst
tablet
thing.
when a commercial break comes on. So again, whether it's that 30-second ad that makes you look up, great storytelling is great storytelling. There's obviously different lengths and formats and ways to do it. I want to jump for a minute to another issue, which is just, I'd love for each of you guys to talk about both, if we kind of move this, as you move this, if you see this is going to always be or continue to be right now an important part of the marketing mix. If the question was, what would it take to make it a bigger piece for you, to have a bigger piece of your budget, or to have both, what do you see as the biggest challenge on your end, both studio and marketer? Is it your processes, your time frame, your budgets, the lack of measurement? What do you see as the biggest challenge on your end, and what do you need to see more of, or what would you like to see more of from the other side? Lauren?
I mean, there's a willingness on our end and openness to this. I think we do live, though, in this, there is a traditional marketplace that happens every year that we sort of live within our own planning timelines, our retail timelines, the marketplace timelines. So I think there's an openness. I think it's working together to reinvent what we've done previously. I think, you know, different folks need traditional advertising for different reasons. You know, franchisees business, we have our bottlers, you know, and there is no, you cannot dispute the impact of television. There is nothing that can get that match reach and awareness. So depending who you're targeting, it's just finding that right mix together. But I think there's openness and willingness. I think for me, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, it's about relationships and having the right relationships and removing the layers, because when business is too difficult to get done in this environment, it doesn't get done. Mm-hmm. And so it's about, you know, starting with a great consumer insight, a creative platform that we can go from, having the right relationships and building the right plan. But at some point, and I think we've seen this from, and you know, more our digital partners, we have a distinct timing that we need to plan within. And I think there's, you know, a latency in some of the markets, right? And although we'd like to hold, you know, I think advertisers would like to hold back money, we all can't, you know, act 3 weeks in advance, a lot of us, particularly in packaged goods. So I think there needs to be just more strategic ownership and sticking to those timelines, I think, is just another important thing.
Laura, from
Yeah,
your
because I was going to say the timelines are the biggest issues.
I was going to say the exact same thing. No
Because-
more fire drills.
Yeah, because we are reacting to a marketplace and we're reacting to pop culture, and you see a great opportunity and you see a great kind of storytelling moment, and you're working with a brand and you feel like you've delivered and everything is kind of coming together and it's coming together nicely. The problem is we have to move quickly. And so that's where the rub happens, is because the brands, just because of the way, legacy and the
Totally
way
agree.
things are being approvals and processes, that they can't move as quickly as sometimes we can just move without them. And so that's what makes me challenged and upset, because I want to move with the brands and I want them to be able to approve copy in 24 hours, because we need to get it that quickly. Just as you probably need our key art, which I can't deliver to you because you need it to put on a package and you need it, 8 months out, and I don't have that yet. So it's kind of like it's those timelines, and we just do business at a very different pace. And so it's kind of the melding of these paces together, and so that comes from having everybody sit at the table together and having a really strong, trusting partnership.
No, the only thing
Yeah.
I'd add is in the world of the rise of brand storytelling, I think we got used to that when what we got in the budget was the last thing that was left. All right, we'll break off $500,000 and we'll see what happens. But as we move to a world where this is much more commonplace, I 100% agree with you. Call us a year in advance, 6 months in advance, when you talk to the other people and say, okay, we're going to spend this much against this target this year, and let's have a real plan and a timeline and a real partnership that isn't built on who's got the best idea in 12 hours.
Because if we can get rid of the RFP process, and that would be, I'm always about the death of the RFP process, because it's just not a process that works
get t-shirts.
on this side. Yeah, we should, kind of.
You got 12 RFPs.
It's just that they nothing really good can come of like having to react and get ideas for 24 hours just to be part of a jump ball, so that you can go with the idea that you all really like in
And
the
by the way,
first
it
place.
increases the price. It is much more,
But
this is
yeah.
not, video production particularly is more expensive on a shorter window than it is
If
on
you
a
have
longer
that
window.
time.
You guys are absolutely right, but from the client side, it's just, I wish that the agencies wouldn't fight with one another, would be one of my big dreams, because we've got creative partners, we've got media partners, we've got product placement partners, and we need everybody to work together in the space to get the most for our brands. And we've got relationships and agencies of record in the different space. So that's one of the things that I wish that our agency partners could get along better. And on the client side, I just think that still structurally we're not set up for the best success in this space. We talked about procurement a little bit and RFPing things, and I'm a big believer, and I also work for a company that buys a lot of parts and widgets, and that's the way our procurement office works, and I can't stress enough that how do you put a value on an idea? And how do you put a price tag on that idea, which is a difficult thing that we still struggle with as clients. I
Yeah, and
think.
to follow Trudy, just with that, measurement standardization, agreement on measurement standards is absolutely vital. There has to be a way, and as an industry, we are actually working towards it pretty assiduously to get there. There has to be agreement on what GRPs look like in digital. You have to be able to plan, buy, execute, and optimize in digital the way we do in other media, so that kind of cross-platform or cross-screen or cross-whatever understanding can be generated and assimilated into the procurement process and the post-buy measurement process. Without that, branded storytelling will remain relatively limited. You got to be able to put it on a platform where it can be understood ultimately by the chief financial officers of the companies at the ends of the
Absolutely.
aisle.
Very, very wise. I would also just add that I think the quality of content is going to be more of an issue, because every company is now being told you have to be always on, you can't be campaign-based, and the more content means, just by nature of things, the more crappy content there will be. The danger is that the viewer, the consumer, will start to shut down to that and raise their hand from the quality stuff, as well as if they're not sure how to separate the two, just as they do with a lot of advertising. So I think, again, that issue of how do we produce a lot of content, but how do brands make sure that they are telling stories that are worth the time of the audience. We are not only out of time, but over time. I do hope you guys got value out of this. I think it accomplished a lot of what we wanted, and at least beginning to present the idea that there is an inevitability to this. You've heard these big brands say this is an important part of who they are and what they do, but also heard a really realistic frame of what are the challenges, issues, and hurdles, and how do we begin to move from this being something that's been kind of tacked on to existing processes and really make it a measurable, important, part of marketing model going forward. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and thank you all for coming out today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.